Hey everyone, Cooper here, host of the fine podcast you're listening to. I just want to let you know that the episode you clicked on has a format that is very heavily inspired by a podcast called The Bookening. To be clear, our thoughts and opinions in this episode are our own, but the format is very similar to this podcast. I just wanted to give you a heads up and give credit where it is due. With that out of the way, enjoy the show. Welcome to Booking It. Today's episode will be Summer Reading 2025. Hey everyone, welcome back to Booking It. Hope you have a very wonderful summer. I'm, of course, your eloquent host, Cooper Cobbs, and joining me today is my favorite cousin. Okay, I can't say that on air. But my cousin, Hayden Hayes.
Howdy, howdy. It is good to be back. Very good to be back. How you doing, Cooper?
Doing very good. Yeah, we are here at the beach on vacation in early June, and we thought that, since we're doing so much reading on the beach, that we would do a podcast and talk about all that we've been reading this summer. So we're just going to kind of talk about some books we've been reading over the summer, talk about the ideas, the books themselves, have a good conversation. But first, Hayden, I don't know, what is your strategy for summer reading? Do you get a list and you just kind of walk through it? Obviously you have more time to do free reading since you're not, bound by school books and things like that. Mm-hmm. So what does your summer reading normally look like? Do you set a goal? How do you accomplish it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, in the past, I've just kind of picked up a book, and the summer is just kind of where I finish it, because during the school year, obviously, like you said, I have school books to read and stuff like that. This summer, though, I kind of took a different approach. I kind of listed a few fiction books I wanted to read, and then I also set a goal of a certain type of theology book I wanted to read. And this summer is apologetics, right? I'm prepping apologetics this summer. I'm just reading a bunch of that, whether it be for school or life or maybe a future episode, something like that. I'm just really studying more apologetics, so I have a whole list of books on my shelf that are apologetics related that I'm going to be reading this summer.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. Yeah, I know for me that, oh gosh,
whoa.
Well, maybe you guys could hear that. It's raining outside, and we just heard a bolt of thunder, bolt of lightning. Sound is thunder. You can hear that. Yeah. But the reason we're doing this podcast right now is because, it's raining, and so we're not at the beach. But hopefully, when we're done, it'll be sunny, and we can go and read on the beach, which would be nice, without ruining our books. For me, the past couple years, I have been kind of just doing a Word document and just putting books that I want to read and then trying to stick to that. This year, I was very, very ambitious, and does it look like I'm going to make all that? Hit all the goals? I think for me,
the goals, yeah.
Yeah, what I really want to focus on this summer is reading closely and reading well and in depth. And so at the end of the day, it's I want to read all these books and in depth. And so if I don't get through all of them, oh well. I just want to get through as many as I can in a respectable depth. So the Once the Future King, which we'll talk about, took me a while to get through. It's kind of it's meant to be done in May with a bunch of other books, but ended up not doing that. So we'll see. We'll see how if I can get back on track with my reading. But it's been very fun reading so far. So we're just going to kind of go. I got about 7 books to talk about. Hayden has 4, I have 3, and we'll just go back and forth. So the first one on our list, Hayden, tell us about.
Yeah, so this technically counts because I started it in March, but I finished it in the summer. So that's got to count.
That's count.
Yeah. I finished it on finals day while waiting for everyone in my class to finish their finals, which took a little bit. So I finished it. The book is What It Means to Be Protestant by Gavin Ortlund. You probably talked about this on the podcast before.
I've talked about Gavin Ortlund. I don't know about his book. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a very good book. It's kind of a condensation of his YouTube works, and it's very useful. It's definitely something good to have on the shelf instead of having to have a whole playlist of Gavin Ortlund videos. You have one book you can refer to.
Right.
And it's very nice. It's probably the most scholarly book I've read outside of school. The source pages, I just flip through it looking at all the sources. It's crazy. The amount of sources that he used on the book. But the book itself is very good. It's very well done, especially since it's just his videos all condensed into one book. But I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was very important to have, that's for sure, and for understanding Protestantism. It definitely was whenever I was reading it, I'm oh, this is just stuff that comes secondhand to me. But that's just because I'm Protestant. I've grown up Protestant. I've been Protestant all my life, so it's like, of course the stuff is second nature, but hearing it, like, why we believe this, how we've come to this, and also, like, the importance of it is definitely very good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I echo all of that. Yeah. I mean, I know for me especially, like, getting into his videos about 2 years ago now, it really helped strengthen my faith and strengthen not just my beliefs in Protestantism, but just belief in Christianity as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's been a big help to a lot of people in many ways for just wrestling with churches and wrestling with doctrine and things like that. I also think that for both Roman Catholics, if you're Roman Catholic listening, and even Orthodox if you are, and Protestant, he is a very good succinct summary. Like Hayden said, it's a very good articulation of classical Protestant beliefs. He cites his sources very well. And so if you're looking for a concise summary of opposing Protestant views, or succinct summary, and a good reminder, a good instruction in what Protestants actually do believe, which has kind of been obscured by many evangelicals and many Roman Catholics caricaturing, it's a very good just refocus on what the Protestant view of the church, of authority of the gospel actually is. And so, and like Hayden said, it's good to have like a reference work where you don't have to like, quote a YouTube video, but you can point to a page number on a book, and it kind of adds some more credibility and authority, and it's, all in one place. So anyway, fantastic book. Highly recommend it. And like Hayden said, it's really just, if you know his ministry on YouTube and stuff, this book is just, comes out of that. And so it's great.
It really does spread from that. If I had to add anything, like, even if you're Protestant, you think you like understand Protestantism to a point, I would still recommend this book because, I walked in like, oh, I know Protestantism, like I know the 5 solas, I know the history of the Reformation, stuff like that. But this really helped to reinforce stuff on like Marian dogma and the icon veneration, and even just like stuff like sola fide and scriptura. Like, Protestantism is so vast and yet also so connected. It's almost like beautiful to look at this book and see how, all these Christian traditions in Protestantism are connected through these core virtues and yet so distinct in their own ways. I definitely think it's very interesting.
All right, well, I guess next book for me is going to be the Once and Future King. So this is a Arthurian legend book, and I picked it up because I wanted to read some Arthurian legends, and I also wanted to read it before I read Lord of the Rings. So that kind of be a fun, like, before reading Lord of the Rings again, I would read, Arthurian legends to see if there was any inspiration or any connection there. But I picked this up, and it's just kind of been one of those books where it's written in the 1950s, I think. So it's kind of, Arthurian legends go all the way back to, the Lamort Arthur, I think, was like 1500s or no, 15th century, maybe 1400s. So it's a very, very old tradition of storytelling, and there have been many books about it ever since. And I read one when I was younger. I got it from the library. I still don't know exactly what book I got. I think it was The Story of King Arthur and His Knights, I think is what it was called, based on some research that I did, but I still don't know. But anyway, so that kind of like got me hooked on King Arthur. I know the basic story, all that kind of stuff, but this is the first kind of major foray I've done into it in a very long time. So in many ways, it's kind of like telling the typical Arthur story. It's got Merlin, Arthur, the Round Table, Sword in the Stone, Guinevere, Lancelot, all that kind of stuff. But also, it's very self-consciously meta about it. Like, it's kind of referencing the Lamort Arthur. Like, it's very obviously trying to be this book that is kind of jokingly retelling, So it's like in dialogue with Lamort Arthur. So the author T.H. White at some points will be like, well, if you want to read this about this tournament that was held, you can go read Mallory. We're not really going to talk about that here, And he's obviously referencing like modern things. Like, he talks about Freud and all that kind of stuff, to where he's just kind of like jokingly referencing a bunch of stuff. But it's actually, I think, pretty well written. Very good style. There's some good parts. And it's also very satiric, very funny. But there's also some parts where it's like, I thought this was a kid's book, and it's definitely not anymore. So, like, the first book is called, it's The Once and Future King is one book. It's got 4 kind of sub-books to it. The first one is The Sword in the Stone. It follows Arthur, who's just kind of like this young liege, basically, to a liege lord, and he is being trained by Merlin. And so they go on all these fun misadventures. Like, Merlin turns him into a fish, he swims around, turns him into an ant, all these kind of things. He's kind of learning, growing, side adventures. And then only in the last, 15 pages do we get the typical, they're at a tournament, the king dies, the sword and the stone appears, he has to go and pull it so Sir Kay can use it in his battle, and then they realize, what, you just pulled the sword, so you're the king now. All that kind of stuff. And then, in the very first chapter of the next book, which is called The Queen of Air and Darkness, I think, it's like this story about how Arthur's dad, forcibly married this queen of the Gales and how they're mad about that, and then there's like Queen Morgase is like burning a cat alive to get this potion. Anyway, it's like, oh crap, like we are in this,
We are in this.
Yeah, exactly. And then the end of that book is just like Arthur conceives Mordred by like his half sister, and who he's seduced by. And it's like, oh my gosh, like
what?
I'm like, yeah, I know, it's pretty crazy.
Wait, what?
I know. And so there are some parts where it's like, oh, the Sword of the Stone is like a fun kids book, and then it's like, this is not a kids book.
Avalon game lore goes too far.
Yeah, I know. So be wary of that. Like there is some stuff where it's like, okay, that's pretty dicey. Especially like with the Guinevere and Lancelot stuff that comes later. If you're famous, if you know the famous story of how Guinevere and Lancelot do their own thing. So, but it's very interesting. It's very philosophical, and like its study of just war. It uses terms like might and right, and Arthur is trying to establish the knights so that the power of the might like doesn't abuse anybody, but is instead used for the right. But just kind of follows when you have 150 strong-willed men with swords, and things happen. So, but there are still some very weird scenes. Like at the end, they basically are about to burn Guinevere at the stake for being an adulteress with Lancelot, and Arthur and Sir Gawain are watching this happen, and Lancelot comes and rescues her and kills like 20 knights of Arthur's, and rescues Guinevere, and Arthur and Gawain are like cheering Lancelot on, like yeah. Arthur is very much presented as, I actually kind of relate to him in many ways, and this noble guy who has the best intentions, but also just doesn't want conflict, and so like he kind of really knows that Guinevere and Lancelot have had this thing for like 20 years, but is like happy to just be their friend and happy to like still be married to Guinevere and all this kind of stuff, and as long as it doesn't come forth, it doesn't interrupt all this kind of stuff, as long as it doesn't affect his dream and his goal of the Round Table, being this force for good, then he's okay with it, So I think it's a very interesting study of Arthur. It's definitely a very interesting, like very modern study of this old story. I think the book is self-consciously that too. But I think it's a very interesting read. So, yeah, but be wary of all that stuff that, it's like, you could be betrayed by the first book. Oh, it's a kid's book. It's really not. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything to say? What's your history with Arthur? Anything?
I only know about King Arthur and stuff like that from... Do you ever watch Troll Hunters on Netflix? No. So, that was like... There's like the kids shows that I watched, like from ages like 1 to 6 or something, and there's like 6 to 10, and then there's like the gap of like 10 to like 14. Yeah. Troll Hunters was in that gap, and it was kind of based off of like Arthurian stuff. Like you had what's it called, like Merlin, Mordred, whatever their names were, yeah. Morgana. Yeah, Morgana was the main villain of it and all that. Yeah. It was actually a decent show, like for Netflix kids, my 10 to 14 era. Yeah. But that's like all the stuff I know is from there. And then of course, like I kind of know the basic story. It's kind of hard not to because it's so pop culture, right. I'll be watching the Minions and they pull the sword from the stone, right. And it's like, oh, okay, that. But yeah, that's like my main what's it called?
Baggage. But yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. It ends very weirdly. So like I think that typically, I don't even really remember how it ended last time, but I think like, I remember how it ended. So Arthur like dies, and so Excalibur isn't really a thing. Like we don't have the story of Excalibur getting pulled from the lake. And so I think in the original story, like he tells us like Squire to go throw it back to the lady in the lake. We don't get that scene. It ends like before the final battle, where Arthur and Lancelot are about to like go attack Mordred, who's like tried to marry Guinevere and claim the kingdom for his own. It's very much actually like Scar and Lion King, kind of more so than Hamlet. Well. Yeah, more so than Hamlet even. But as they're about to do that, Arthur kind of like tells this page of his like, hey, basically when we die, like tell them the story, tell them we had good intentions, and tell them this was the idea behind it, all that kind of stuff, and then basically ends like the night before the battle with Arthur like talking to himself about all these things. So anyway, interesting book. Recommended, I guess, as a case study. It's not like, if you don't like classical Arthur, could do some research or read some more of the ancient kid stories. Or you can read the more Arthur, I guess. I haven't read that. So, but yeah, anyway. So, next book on the list that you've talked about, The Westing Game. Tell us about this one.
You've never read it. I had no idea what it was. A friend from church recommended it to me and pretty much just lending me the copy. And like apparently it was like super big at church and homeschool groups, so sure. they've all definitely read this. And they're like, you need to read this. So I like read it in a few days at a trip in Big Bend. I just like sat down and read it front to back. It's actually pretty short. And it was actually pretty decent. It was definitely not my favorite murder mystery, right?
Wait, tell us about the plot. What's the plot?
Okay. So the kind of the basic plot of it is all these people are somehow connected to this one guy, Sam Westing,
Okay.
and he dies. Okay, all right, and they find his body. And they're all like pretty much like related to him in some way, but by the end you realize they're all his enemies.
Okay.
And the whole plot of the book is that he's still alive, right? And what he's doing is he's just helping his enemies have like better lives, pretty much. That's the whole thing. You don't realize that till the end. I had to get told that. I was like, oh, it's a fun murder mystery. Oh, the girl figures it out. Of course, the little girl main character figures it out. And I was like, it's like, okay, book. And my friend's like, yeah, you realize that like he was like helping his enemies like have better lives and like giving them all friends and stuff. I'm like, oh shoot, he was. What a goat. Well, yeah, that's pretty much the whole plot. It's just a guy who didn't have it too good helping his enemies.
Okay.
So it was actually like pretty sweet. It's a nice like kids book.
Yeah.
It's pretty clean, no real gore or action. It's just pretty funny, honestly, if anything. But it's like my one problem with it is I didn't really like all the characters. I never like felt attached to any of them.
Sure.
But I don't think you're supposed to because they are like his enemies, and you're kind of looking at it from his perspective, but not really. So it's interesting. I would recommend. It's pretty short. Probably could read it in like a day or so. But yeah, I definitely would recommend. Nice little kids book to read. Yeah,
That's cool.
Solid mystery.
Awesome. All right. Well, next one for me is one I just finished this morning, but Miracles by C.S. Lewis. So I think you have like the C.S. Lewis editions that are very popular nowadays. On the back,
Yeah.
one of the quotes that is like by the New York Times or something like that. It's like C.S. Lewis is the ideal persuader for the half-convinced, for the good man who would like to be a Christian but finds his intellect getting in the way. This book is kind of like the epitome of that quote, I think, in that it's just a very helpful introduction to miracles and to how to think about miracles from a Christian perspective and how to justify them epistemologically. That is, like, how can we know miracles actually happen? And so, when we're talking about the resurrection, obviously one of the big objections to it is just, well, obviously miracles either can't happen or just so unlikely that any evidence we have will just always be outweighed by the fact that something else just must have happened because it's just so improbable. But that just comes from a presupposition of like, hey, we know these things can't happen, therefore we're going to count all the evidence for it, in a very negative light. And same thing happens when you're like dating the text. Like, the Book of Daniel, for instance, is often dated much later than more conservative scholars would because it has prophecies that seem to be fulfilled in people that purportedly take place after the book. And so because prophecy can't happen, well, the book must be dated later.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like anti-supernaturalist presuppositions are getting in the way of them dating the book. And really the only good reasons for dating Matthew, Mark, and Luke before AD 70 is that same thing, the prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem. But it's pretty reasonable to suggest that the fall of Jerusalem took place after the Gospels. So, what do you do with that? Anyway, kind of sidetracking. But C.S. Lewis basically just goes through, talks about naturalism and supernaturalism, and kind of defines those views. It then says we have good reason to think that supernaturalism is true. And then from that, we have good reason to also believe that sometimes the supernatural can break in upon the natural and form miracles. So that's kind of like the first few chapters, and just kind of establishing all of that. I think that's like where he's like the most helpful. Just kind of like breaking down the arguments, and also just how to write like a nonfiction argument book. Like every paragraph begins like a topic sentence, concludes with a summary. In the middle is just proof. It's very, very good. This was incredible at that. I also found that his chapter on probability, where basically he refutes Hume's argument against miracles, probably the most helpful of all of these, chapter 13, where basically he's just pointing out that if you assume the uniformity of nature, then obviously miracles can't happen. But what reason do we have to suppose the uniformity of nature besides this kind of presupposition that we're bringing to it? So we can't prove the uniformity of nature by the uniformity of nature, So it's kind of saying like we need this principle that is kind of just innate, inherent to us. And so, anyway, he kind of disproves Hume from there, and then basically says, but he talks about just the kind of our inherent view of how nature works, and that is kind of the only reason we suppose that the universe is uniform in nature. And so, because of that, miracles basically have to exist, because the only way we can have such a universe where the nature is uniform and our minds are attuned to that is a nature in which God exists, and God must exist to create miracles. So, and because God exists, miracles can't happen, basically. So that was very convoluted in my explanation there, but C.S. Lewis makes a lot more sense, I promise you. So, anyway, he kind of talks about probability and epistemology and all that kind of stuff in this book, and he goes off on tangents. Like, he talks a lot about, near the end, what the new creation looks like versus the old creation, the physicality of the resurrection body, the new creation. He kind of goes on a tangent in the beginning about an argument from reason, where he argues that the use of reason is an argument against naturalism. So kind of interesting stuff. Not all of it's like, related to his exact thesis, but it's still very relevant and very helpful book. So if you're like having doubts about miracles, you have a friend that doubts miracles or something like that, Miracles is a great book to kind of give them that and introduce them. So yeah, any thoughts on Miracles? Yes, Lewis, you're going to start Mere Christianity yesterday.
Yeah, I've started Mere Christianity, so I'm definitely getting more into the apologetic side of C.S. Lewis as I move into the summer. But yeah, I'll definitely be picking that up for sure eventually later on down the road. I have nothing to say on the immediate, if you want to move on. Or
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
All right. Next book, a book I finished, I think, a day or two ago. No, that's tomorrow. I finished it yesterday. Was The Road. I know that you and Isaiah have done an episode on this, so yep. I'll be a little brief in my kind of synopsis since y'all have already done an episode, which I need to listen to now. But yeah, The Road. Great book. Oh my gosh. This is my first Cormac McCarthy novel, so I'm definitely getting more used to his style of writing, less punctuation, pretty much no chapters.
Yeah.
Just flows. I really like it. It's nice for reading fast. It flows very well. But the problem with that is that The Road, I feel like, needs to be read slowly. It needs to be taken slowly because that's how the inner part of the book feels. That's where all the weight is how slow and methodical the movement of the father and son are as they go across the pretty much just barren landscape.
Yeah.
It definitely makes the other scenes more tense, like the scenes in the house or while they're walking to the campfire where the burnt baby is. By the way, this is a very dark book. It's definitely the darkest book I've read.
Yeah,
but
it's very dark.
I didn't really like. I thought it pretty much matched the tone, so I didn't really mind the gore too much. But yeah, I really liked it. It was very Christian, is what I want to say, because the themes of it, of like, in a time where how can you believe God exists? You see the characters crying out to God.
Yeah. Like,
literally, I'm like, is Cormac, like, is this intentional? Is this, like, intentionally Christian virtues here? Like, what am I reading? Like, I got confused. I was like, he's crying out to God. Like, this is, like, deep stuff. Like, man. And even, like, the joy at the end. Like, the last page of the book, I was like, man, this is a bundle of joy. And I remember what came before. I'm like, okay, maybe just the end's a bundle of joy. Like, you were there. I was like smiling, like all giddy, and then my dad was like, "What have you done, Cooper?"
Yeah, no, it definitely, like, I think that you need to really misread the book to miss the hope that's in it for sure. I don't think that the book can be called a bundle of joy for sure. Overall, but like you said, like, I think that this is the book where you can kind of see. Cormac McCarthy is not a Christian by any means. And these books, have varying degrees of people searching for God and that kind of thing. But in this book, I'd say the most is you can see where it comes out, the questioning comes out more Christian than his other books.
Yeah.
Where, like, the hope is very Christian. It seems like, the couple at the end, I guess spoilers here, but, I guess for all these books. But the couple at the end that rescues him, speaks to him about God, all these kind of things where carrying the fire is a very hopeful metaphor.
Yeah.
Even in this awful place, these people are carrying on hope. They're carrying on the moral order about, not eating people. not killing people. And they try to help people along the way. At least the boy helps the dad to see that. It's just, a beautiful book. You can go listen to our episode for my full thoughts on it. But I
definitely think there's an interesting dynamic between the father and son as the book continues along. It seems to be like almost like a power shift towards the end, where the son is taking more perspective. The son is taking more control, and you're really getting to see the son more. He talks more as it goes on. It doesn't just go from questions, which is the starting point. It really goes to questions and then control in the questions near the middle, and then at the end he's just the one talking pretty much, and it's the father pretty much giving out most of the questions, which I think is very interesting. I don't know if that's intentional. Probably is. But yeah, very Christian in the fact of what the son asked and what he's doing. Like I said, carrying the fire, sparing, are we the good guys? Where is God? Talking to God, stuff like that.
Next book for me, The Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser. This book is an influential book in many ways for some evangelicals because it kind of is very famous in kind of helping some people re-see or redefine categories when it comes to reading the Old Testament and reading the kind of angels, Elohim, all these kind of things about the Old Testament. So it opens up where he basically talks about his experience reading Psalm 82. And Psalm 82 basically says that God, or Elohim in Hebrew, sits in the divine assembly. He judges amongst the Elohim. And often that's taken to be rendered gods, So there's a big debate over whether that refers to angelic beings, spiritual beings that are not God, but also not human, or is referring to humans. So also debate because, this is off track a little bit, but Jesus quotes from that passage in John 10 for an argument, and so it makes it seem like he thought those people were human, and so there's a big debate about that. Anyway, Michael Heiser argues, and he's, drawing upon a lot of scholarship in many ways here, that God is, not the only Elohim in the sense that there are other spiritual beings. We often refer to them as angels. He says that's a bit of a misnomer, but these angels make up a divine council where God judges it, and so this is very big in Job, especially, where you can kind of see Satan coming into the divine courtroom, and God is holding counsel basically. He also argues that the plurals in Genesis 1 through 11, so like let us make man in our image, or in the Babel story, let us go down and confuse your language, refers to God speaking to his divine assembly. So that's kind of his basic argument. Of course, he argues, in traditional orthodoxy, traditional monotheism, God is qualitatively different than all the other spiritual beings. He is vastly different. But that, just as he created imagers for himself on earth to rule, he created imagers of himself to rule in the heavenly spaces. So, very interesting book. In many ways, departing from like traditional views of Satan, and some places, traditional views on other things, just like the medieval view of angels kind of being these divine servants and messengers, and also just kind of like reading Elohim in many places to refer to the council. Heavenly being, the council. So if you're familiar with the Bible Project, he's been very influential. I think he's like a counselor for them, or was before he passed away recently, on kind of their theology. So you'll get a lot of that if you watch their videos on related items. But I think he's also just very helpful in understanding some confusing passages. He also is very good about like the angel of Yahweh, and what that means is that God incarnate, and how that applies to the New Testament. So some very interesting stuff going on there. I need to read more about it. I'm not like super well read on like Old Testament theology when it comes to that kind of thing. But it's a very important read because it's been influential and contentious in many ways. So anything to say about that?
No, like you said, I'm also not very well read in that respective covenant theology when it comes to the divine council. I've definitely seen a lot of that more recently with Gavin Ortlund videos, but I don't really know what I think about it. It's definitely something I eventually will study up more on.
So interesting book. I think it's a good read. It's very thought provoking and interesting, and helps you see passages. I would definitely try to read or watch people who interact with him, so you can kind of see where his views diverge. I do think he has a very low view of church tradition, which I would not hold. So he's like very sola scriptura in the way that but also instead of like having church tradition as a lens to help see the Bible, he kind of uses ancient Near East literature and scholars to help him read, the Bible, and what he argues would be the original meaning of the text. So, anyway, but interesting read. Recommend for good study and some helpful things as well. So, okay, your final book, Hayden.
Oh yes, my final book, The Screwtape Letters. Yes, another C.S. Lewis to add to the list. This one I finished 3 days ago, I think, as the time of recording. Very good book, very influential. It's definitely very interesting because every letter all the letters I realized build up to the last pretty much. It's following, it's in timeline order. I thought it was like going to be like non-linear, kind of like just Screwtape writing this wisdom in air quotes, right, to Wormwood. I definitely think it's interesting in the fact that Lewis is able to like so accurately represent, right? We don't know exactly how, if the demons do this, right, but we know that they do exist, and they do exist to tempt us. And so it is definitely very interesting of like an elder demon writing to the younger one. It is very satirical. It talks about the secret police are gonna come and get you because you lost this one. Right. It's very funny, and I enjoy laughing at it. But there's also like a lot of wisdom in how to tempt. I think my favorite chapter. Hold up. I also made sure to mark all the chapters. I have some sticky notes, and I wrote down the chapter because it doesn't have names or topics. I wrote down what was mentioned in that. And so the 12th chapter, where it talks about having a gentle slope to hell, I think is probably the most like, that's the thesis of Screwtape, is you want to slowly lure the human, the guy that they're tempting, the wormwood's tempting, slowly a gentle slope into hell, right? And that's kind of what everything else is building up to. I mean, he's trying to like, turn his godly spouse against him, right? He's trying to turn his own relationships with his mother against him, right? But very slowly, he's like, don't go full into it. You want to like make it very methodical. He says like, if cards works, use cards, whatever works. Just we got to get him in here, and we're going to slowly do that. Now, the one interesting point I take, which I know me and C.S. Lewis will take disagreements on certain things, but like I think it's interesting how, because there's that one passage where like the demons know of God and they shudder. I don't see a lot of fear in here, right? But I also think that, what's it called? I feel like the demons would understand or know of God's power, and so in that respect, they would understand that their efforts in the end are in vain. Yeah. Right. But I didn't really get that feeling. I got kind of the feeling of like a spiritual battle where like, okay, God might lose, the demons might lose here, right? That's kind of the feeling I got, which I obviously take a disagreement with. Yeah.
I think that the counter argument would just be, well, that's what, okay, maybe intuitively they think that, they're going to lose. They know that. But, like, it's like their propaganda, basically. Like, they're not going to say that. And, and I don't even think, like, I think if you read between the lines, I think that it's obvious they, we obviously know they're not going to win. But, I don't think it's a big deal to say that, oh, well, I didn't see that.
It's just like the only thing where I was like, I kind of take a little disagreement here. Like, but like you said, is their propaganda? Like, it makes sense. Yeah.
But I think it is very helpful to see temptation from another side. I think I should do have an episode. I think it's like 60-something. We talk about Screwtape.
Yes,
it's pretty good.
It was way back when. Yeah, way back when.
Yeah, I think me and Isaiah talked about that one. Different Isaiah from the last time we talked about Isaiah on the road. But two things I remember being very helpful from Screwtape were just like the demons reiterating the fact that Christ has an advantage over them because he became human. Yeah. And so like he actually can really understand to us more than anybody else can. And then also, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yes, just the stuff about like distracting the human with like daily annoyances and like just keep him annoyed at everybody, and just and not alienate him from all his friends and relationships, and that just will distract him from being truly joyful and pursuing things.
Even having like the church distract him. They talk about how even the fact he's in the church, they can still use it against him. I'm like, that's crazy.
Like critiquing
other people in the church. It's I know that was in there, like that was the 3rd chapter, and I was like, dang, like oh my gosh.
Yes. I know. It is.
Also, like the one where he talked about the false churches, which is like 1900s something, really lot like American Christianity in the 21st century. That's for sure. Yeah. A lot of like the either like super pharisaical, which that was kind of funny that the demons would talk about the what's it called?
The legalists. Yeah.
The pure. No, they're like the Puritan. They're like, oh, Puritanism. We love Puritanism. I'm like, all right, I get what you're trying to say.
I think C.S. Lewis actually likes the Puritans
too,
which is funny. So.
I don't know. Maybe it was just like satirical, like haha, kind of funny moment.
Yeah.
That's how I took it at least. But like you talked about like the super over legalistic, and it talked about like the guy who's like dumbed down the gospel so much to where his congregation understands it more than him. Yeah. Where it's like that's not even saying that much too, because he's the one preaching. So I thought that was also very interesting, because I'm like that's pretty representative of like a lot of pop culture American Christianity nowadays, where we're like trying to make everything simple and simple and simpler and simpler. Where it's like, no, we need to keep it to where the layman can understand. Yes, but we're not gonna take back from the truth.
Right? Reduce it. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, obviously it's a very famous and influential book for a reason.
Oh yes.
Highly recommend from both of us. So
indeed.
All right. Well, that's the ones we talked about. We both have other reading we've done and are going to do. But hopefully it's encouraging to you guys to get out there and read some books over the summer. And maybe you got some ones to add to the list now. So anyhow, this is us, Cooper and Hayden, signing off for now.
We don't have to do the donor shout-outs.
That's right. Thanks for money. Yes, I love that. Oh, my goodness.
Welcome to Redacted Podcast Name, because by the time we're done with this, we're going to have a new name, hopefully. I'm joking.
Yeah, we'll see.
I actually think, I had this idea last night. Right, you have Booking It Screening, okay?
Yep.
You should make a 3rd podcast, because you're more like conversational episodes. Yeah. Right? I feel like that would be really good as a podcast, because then you can just like pump stuff out on that. Like, I don't know. I just feel like with Booking It, it's kind of like the continuity, is little like, book, and then we're like really cool like episodes. Like, I want more of this, But it's like on Booking It. It's just But I don't know. It's your podcast, like.
Right. That's right.
I'm not gonna come in here and intrude.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you to our donors who support us over at patreon.com/bookin for $5 or more. Thank you to Nana, Van Pappy and Wayla, Keenan, Will, and my mom, Miss Jenny. Thank you so much for your support.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. So, until next time.
Keep on booking it.